April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet over France. German aces laugh into their masks at the fat new American fighters clawing upward. They call them flying milk bottles. 18 months later, the same sound those pilots mocked, the hard mechanical snarl of 8 synchronized Brownings, will make veterans flinch before they even look up. They had expected a duelist and met a sledgehammer. The United States asked for a high-altitude interceptor in 1940. Republic delivered a machine that looked wrong to anyone raised on European logic. A turbo buried in the belly, an 18-cylinder radial up front, ducting and mass everywhere. On the ground, it punished careless hands. Ground loops, torque rolls, abrupt stalls. In the thin air, it did something most fighters could not. It kept breathing. Where single-stage blowers faded and BMWs and Daimlers ran out of sky, the double Wasp still made power. Early combat seemed to vindicate the mockery. The Jug did not carve in a turn, did not spring upward at medium altitude, did not dance. American losses mounted, but beneath the statistics, a pattern formed. The airplanes that failed to return had stayed in the fight long after other types would have come apart. The ones that did return looked impossible. Holes counted by the 100. Systems shot through and still working. A radial that tolerated wounds a liquid-cooled engine could not survive. And when a P-47 actually settled a target in its sight picture, airplanes did not drift down. They broke. Robert S. Johnson proved the point the hard way. Cannon shells burst across his aircraft. Oil blackened the windscreen. The canopy jammed. Shrapnel cut his face. Trapped in a dying machine at altitude, he pointed west and held on. A lone FW-190 found him and emptied everything it had, cannon first, then machine guns, until the belts ran dry. The Thunderbolt kept flying. It landed barely, and crews stopped counting perforations after they had reached a number no one believed the day before. On both sides of the front, assessments changed. The Jug was not graceful. It was stubborn. Survival bought time. Time taught doctrine. The P-47 would not fight the German way. It would own the roof, roll over, fall like a safe, and rise again with the weight of the atmosphere in its wings. Dive speeds past 500 miles per hour turned deflection problems into certainty. A short, brutal exposure inside a convergence bubble where 8 guns spoke as one. With more than 30 seconds of ammunition on tap, the trigger was no longer a rationed commodity. It became a continuous instrument, measured, metered, and deadly. Then came the fixes that erased doubt. The paddle blade propeller bit the air like an oar, and the Jug woke up in climb and acceleration. The new sound carried for miles, a heavy thunder that soldiers on the ground learned to distinguish before they could see the silhouette. External tanks stretched the map. Escorts rode higher and farther. To reach the bombers, German formations had to fly through a screen that did not flame out after a few brief bursts, and did not vanish when the first element turned for home. It stayed, hour after hour, layer upon layer. High above, thin air betrayed reputations. Engines that were lively at 15,000 feet felt starved at 28. Control responses dulled. The Jug, still on song, arrived from 4,000 feet above, fired inside a 6-foot disc of certainty, and converted speed back into altitude while the Defender sagged in the vertical. Even luminaries could not will physics to change. Experience and markings and tallies on a rudder could not add oxygen to a supercharger that had nothing left to give. On the ground, the war tilted further. June 6, 1944. Daylight over Normandy belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts stacked from sea to stratosphere made the very act of transit a calculation of risk with only bad answers. In the weeks that followed, daylight movement became expensive theater. Locomotives burst, columns shredded, convoys erased by short, merciless applications of .50 caliber and high-velocity rockets. Men gave the fighter bombers a single word and treated it like an illness: yabos. Symptoms: the sound arrives first, then the instinct to find Earth and stay under it. Across the Pacific, the same design logic paid in different currency. Distance punished fragile machines. Heat and rain punished delicate systems. The Jug's legs lengthened, its wings went wet, and the fat fighter that couldn't climb escorted heavies and smashed airfields across maps the size of oceans. Nimble opponents discovered that surviving the first scissor meant little if the return fire was a sustained river rather than a sputter of cannon shells with 2 seconds left in the drum. Jets should have ended the conversation. They did not. A Jug that started high and dove early could place its circle of fire in front of an Me-262 that expected respect for speed. A Jug that loitered near a runway could turn the takeoff roll and the landing pattern into a trap. Late war hot rod variants pushed the envelope further, but the constant remained. The gun battery as verdict. When the 8 spoke together, the argument ended. The Luftwaffe's last gamble, field strikes at dawn, proved one final asymmetry. Airframes burned on Allied tarmac. The answer was not a speech. It was a logistics fact. Replacement Thunderbolts arrived, slotted into dispersals, and taxied by the wrecks they were replacing. Across the line, pilots who could not be rebuilt did not come back to their dispersals at all. The Jug was the visible face of a supply chain that ran from ore to refinery to factory to depot to flight line, with a consistency none of Germany's enemies had ever achieved against it, until now. By the spring of 1945, the ledger no longer resembled a duel. Fuel had turned to memory. Names that once bent tactics around themselves were gone. New names arrived with too few hours in their logbooks to survive the first bounce. The sky, as territory, belonged to a machine that had been designed around power, protection, and endurance, and to a system that could feed it metal, ammunition, and crews faster than combat could consume them. The verdict was not written in adjectives. It was written in ratios, in trains not arriving, in tanks abandoned for lack of fuel or nerve, in airfields that produced smoke instead of sorties. The Thunderbolt did not win because it was pretty in a turn or elegant in a climb. It won because it survived the first pass, dictated the second, and guaranteed the third. Because its trigger time outlasted its enemy's courage. Because its nation could lose 10 airframes and start the next morning with 12. The pilots who had laughed at it in 1943 did not laugh in 1944. The ones who survived into 1945 spoke of a sound first, and only then of a shape. A dry, roaring thrum that meant the conversation was over. They had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes and Yaks without flinching. The Jug made them hope for Cloud. The heaviest single-engine fighter to go to war in mass ended that war with a simple lesson. In the brutal arithmetic of daylight, power that still breathes at altitude, guns that fire longer than nerves can hold, and factories that answer every loss will always beat elegance. The milk bottle became the hammer, and when the hammer fell, the Luftwaffe broke. The milk bottle became the hammer, and when the hammer fell, the Luftwaffe broke. But the story didn't end when the last dogfight faded. Behind the wreckage and statistics were the men who had lived those moments, pilots who had watched arrogance turn to dread. Their diaries and letters tell the real cost of the Thunderbolt's arrival, a war of nerves that no one could train for. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin wrote home in late 1944, "You can hear the German guns before you see them, but they're never firing at us long. We roll, dive, and they're gone. Every time we come back with holes, the crew patches them, and the next morning the Jug's waiting again. The enemy must think we've got an endless sky full of these things." To him, the power of the P-47 wasn't just its firepower. It was its immortality. It didn't die when logic said it should. Pilots climbed into a machine that looked more like a safe than a fighter, and trusted it to bring them home. That confidence, repeated across hundreds of sorties, changed the way men fought. Across the lines, the tone in German logbooks shifted from mockery to disbelief. Oberleutnant Hans Linde of Jagdgeschwader 26 recorded after a mission over Rouen, "The fat Americans dive from the sun. I hit one again and again, cannon shells exploding on the wings. Nothing happens. It turns, spits fire, and another of ours is gone. They don't fly like fighters. They fall like stones, then rise like thunder. What had once been technical frustration became superstition. Ground crews spoke of iron monsters and cursed pigs. Pilots who had once boasted of 10, 20 victories now whispered that one pass from a Thunderbolt meant death, no matter your experience. In December 1943, the Luftwaffe's medical corps noted a new phenomenon, Jabo fever, fighter-bomber fever. Pilots suffered stomach pain, trembling, and insomnia before daylight sorties. Some requested reassignment to night units just to avoid facing Thunderbolts. The psychological erosion moved faster than fuel shortages or pilot attrition. The Luftwaffe wasn't only running out of planes, it was running out of courage. On the American side, confidence hardened into ritual. Pilots rubbed the armor plate behind their seats before takeoff, calling it the Angel. They flew into flak zones knowing that metal and engineering had replaced luck. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts later recalled, "The first time I saw tracers walk up the canopy, I ducked. The second time, I didn't. You learn that the jug can take it. You stop flinching. That calm became its own weapon." A German ace might have experience. An American jug pilot had faith in machinery, and 1,000 more waiting behind him. Letters recovered from German officers near the end of the war capture the final mood. One, written by Hauptmann Kurt Bahr to his wife in February 1945, read, "We still fly, but we no longer fight the enemy in the air. We fight the idea that he cannot be destroyed. His planes arrive faster than ours can be refueled. I shot one down today and saw 3 more behind it. There is no victory left, only delay." His words were never mailed. The airfield fell 2 days later. Even in victory, the American pilots carried the memory differently. Robert Johnson, years after the war, described walking through a German air museum and seeing an FW-190. It was beautiful, sleek, perfect. I thought of the kid who fired every shell he had into my jug and saluted before he broke off. He was brave. We both did what we were built to do. But I had a machine that didn't quit. The Thunderbolt's legacy wasn't only metal or numbers. It was psychological dominance rendered mechanical. Every time its engines turned over, it reminded the enemy that America could outlast, outbuild, and outfire anything thrown at it. When the sky finally fell silent, veterans on both sides agreed on one thing. The jug didn't win because of luck or tactics. It won because it erased fear on one side and created it on the other. The milk bottle had become the hammer, and the hammer had taught the world what industrial warfare really sounded like. If this kind of record-driven episode hits the mark, subscribe, like, and comment your next target. Another machine, a battle, or a pilot whose story needs the full treatment.